At 2 o'clock in the morning, Larissa Constance, the famously cold, iron-disciplined CEO, secretly followed Archibald Flynn, the poor janitor who always left the building at unusual hours. For weeks, she suspected he was hiding something dangerous, but when she gently pushed open the door of the old warehouse, Larissa froze. Archie was kneeling among broken machines, fixing them one by one for a group of orphaned children sleeping beside him, and he was using his entire meager salary to feed them. 2 in the morning had exposed a truth that daylight never revealed. But would it be enough to change a CEO's heart? The Buxton Industries tower stood like a steel fortress against the winter sky, its glass windows reflecting nothing but ambition and cold calculation. On the 32nd floor, Larissa Constance sat behind her mahogany desk, blonde, wavy hair catching the harsh fluorescent light as she reviewed another cost-cutting proposal from the board. At 34, she had climbed to the top of a world that showed no mercy to weakness, no tolerance for sentiment. Her red V-neck dress, tailored to perfection, was her armor. Her sharp features and angular jawline were her weapons. But her eyes, those piercing blue eyes, held something else beneath the ice. A sadness she refused to acknowledge, even to herself. Larissa had been raised in the glass towers and marble corridors of old money. Her father had taught her one lesson above all others: trust no one, especially those who work beneath you. They want what you have, he'd said. They'll smile while they steal. So Larissa built walls higher than any skyscraper, colder than any winter wind. She viewed her employees as numbers on spreadsheets, functions in a machine. The Buxton board pressed down on her every single day, demanding results, questioning her decisions, waiting for her to stumble. She needed control. She needed certainty. She needed to believe that her world was predictable, manageable, safe. 30 floors below, in the basement maintenance room, Archibald Flynn wrung out his mop and leaned it against the wall. He was 36, tall and broad-shouldered, with a kind face that looked perpetually tired. His skin was tanned from years of outdoor work before this, his dark brown hair slightly disheveled from working the night shift. He wore the standard gray janitor's uniform, but something about the way he moved, precise, thoughtful, deliberate, suggested this was not where he belonged. And he knew it. Archie had once been one of the top mechanical engineers in the country. MIT educated, brilliant, sought after by tech giants and aerospace companies. He'd had offers from NASA, from SpaceX, from firms that would have made him wealthy beyond measure. But then Callista got sick. Ovarian cancer, stage 4. The medical bills piled up faster than his salary could cover them. He'd quit his job to care for her full-time, burning through their savings, selling their home, pawning his wedding ring just to buy her one more month. When she died, he had nothing left but a promise he'd made to her in those final days. Take care of the children she'd been fostering, 5 little souls who had nowhere else to go. So, Archibald Flynn became a janitor. He took the first job that would hire him without questions, without background checks that might reveal his past. He needed cash in hand, weekly, to feed Gwen, Audrey, Beatrix, the younger Larissa, and Matilda, 5 orphans aged between 5 and 12, each one brilliant, each one starving for opportunity. During the day, they stayed with an elderly neighbor who asked no questions. At night, after his shift ended at 2 in the morning, Archie went to the abandoned warehouse he'd converted into their secret home. There, he repaired donated computers, soldered broken circuit boards, fixed bicycles and radios, and anything else people threw away, teaching the children that value isn't determined by price tags or appearance. No one at Buxton Industries knew who he really was. No one suspected that the quiet man who cleaned their toilets could redesign their entire infrastructure in his sleep. But Larissa Constance had begun to notice things. It started 3 weeks ago, when she'd stayed late to review quarterly reports. She'd wandered down to get coffee from the executive kitchen and spotted Archie in the server room. He wasn't supposed to be there. The door was marked, restricted access. Yet there he was, bent over an exposed circuit board, his fingers moving with startling confidence. She'd watched from the shadows as he identified a failing capacitor, replaced it with one from his toolkit, and had the system running again in under 4 minutes. The next morning, the IT department had taken credit for the fix, never knowing that a janitor had saved them hours of diagnostic work. Larissa told herself it was probably nothing. Maybe he'd picked up some skills. Maybe he'd watched YouTube videos. But then, she noticed his toolbox precision instruments that cost more than his monthly salary. She noticed the way he examined machinery, the way his eyes tracked electrical pathways like he was reading sheet music, and she noticed that he always left the building at exactly 2:15 in the morning, his backpack heavy, his expression guarded. The board of directors had been pressuring Larissa to find cost savings. They wanted layoffs. They wanted scapegoats. They wanted someone to blame for last quarter's earnings miss, even though it had nothing to do with personnel. During the last meeting, Franklin Buxton himself had sneered across the mahogany table. "Perhaps your leadership is too soft, Larissa. Perhaps you trust the wrong people." She'd felt the walls closing in. She needed to prove her ruthlessness. She needed to show them she could make hard decisions. And Archibald Flynn, the janitor who stayed late and carried mysterious equipment and accessed restricted areas, seemed like the perfect candidate. If she could prove he was stealing, or sabotaging, or selling company secrets, she'd have her scapegoat. She'd have proof that she was vigilant, that she protected company assets, that she deserved her position. So, Larissa made a decision that would change everything. She would follow him. She would catch him in the act, and she would use him to secure her own position, no matter what the cost to his life. On a bitter Thursday night in late January, Larissa prepared for her surveillance mission. She removed her red dress and pulled on dark jeans, a black turtleneck, and a charcoal wool coat she'd bought years ago for a skiing trip and never worn since. She abandoned her 4-inch heels for flat leather boots. In the executive bathroom mirror, she barely recognized herself, no makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, looking more like a college student than a CEO. But her eyes still held that same hardness, that same determination to win at any cost. She waited in her office until exactly 1:45 in the morning. Through her window, she watched the last of the cleaning crew leave through the front entrance. All except one. At 1:58, Archie emerged from the basement access door, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. Larissa slipped out through the executive entrance and followed from a distance, keeping to the shadows along Fifth Avenue. The city, at 2 in the morning, was a different world. Streetlights cast orange pools on icy sidewalks. A few homeless people huddled in doorways. A taxi cruised past, empty. Larissa's heart hammered in her chest, partly from exertion, partly from something else she didn't want to name. Fear, excitement, guilt. She pushed the thoughts away and focused on the figure ahead. Archie walked with purpose, his stride long and steady. He turned east onto 42nd Street, then south past the old industrial district. Larissa stayed half a block behind, ducking behind parked cars when he paused at intersections. Her breath came faster now. Where was he going? Who was he meeting? What was in that backpack? After 20 minutes of walking, Archie reached the warehouse district near the river. These buildings had been abandoned for decades. Their windows broken, their walls covered in graffiti. Larissa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. This was exactly the kind of place where illegal deals went down, where stolen goods were fenced, where people disappeared. She crouched behind a rusted dumpster as Archie approached a particularly decrepit warehouse with a faded sign reading Riverside Storage Company. He pulled out a key, not an ordinary key, but something he'd clearly fashioned himself from metal scraps, and unlocked the padlock on a side door. Warm yellow light spilled out for just a moment before he slipped inside and closed the door behind him. Larissa waited, counting to 60, her pulse racing. Then she crept forward, her boots crunching on broken glass and frozen mud. The warehouse was silent except for the whistle of wind through broken roof panels. Larissa pressed herself against the wall beside the door Archie had used. Through a crack in the warped wood, she could see that warm light again, could hear the faint sound of movement inside. She took a breath, steeled herself, and gently pushed the door open just wide enough to see inside. What she saw made her freeze completely, her breath catching in her throat. The inside of the warehouse had been transformed into something impossible. A dozen salvaged electric heaters created a warm bubble of air. Old carpets covered the concrete floor. Along one wall stood 5 small cots, and on those cots slept 5 children girls, ranging from maybe 5 years old to early teens, their faces peaceful in sleep, their small bodies wrapped in donated blankets and second-hand quilts. In the center of the space, Archie knelt among a dozen broken machines, computers with cracked screens, laptops missing keys, ancient radios, bicycles with bent frames. He was working on a laptop, his soldering iron glowing orange in the dim light, his movements steady and sure. As Larissa watched, unable to move or speak or even think, one of the little girls stirred. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, her hair falling in tangles around her face. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old. "Uncle Archie," the girl whispered, her voice full of joy. "You're back." Archie set down his tools and opened his arms. The girl Irene, Larissa would later learn, rushed over and hugged him tightly around the neck. "I fixed Mrs. Patterson's computer today," Archie said softly, stroking her hair. "That means we have enough for new notebooks for everyone. Will we have laptops for school tomorrow?" Irene asked, her eyes wide with hope. "3 of them are ready," Archie replied. "I'm working on the 4th right now. By Monday, you'll all have one." Irene kissed his cheek and padded back to her cot, settling under her blankets with a contented sigh. Archie returned to his work, and Larissa stood frozen in the doorway, her entire worldview cracking apart like ice under a sledgehammer. Every suspicion she'd held, every accusation she'd been preparing, every judgment she'd made, all of it shattered in an instant. This man wasn't stealing. He wasn't sabotaging. He wasn't selling secrets or meeting criminals. He was fixing broken things for children who had nothing. He was using his brilliant mind and skilled hands to create opportunity out of garbage. He was spending his 2:15 in the morning hours being the kind of person Larissa had forgotten existed. Tears stung her eyes, and she realized with shock that she couldn't remember the last time she'd cried. But she couldn't stand there forever. She needed to leave, to process this, to understand what it meant. She turned carefully, trying to step backward, and her boot came down on an empty aluminum can. The metallic crunch echoed like a gunshot in the quiet night. Instantly, Archie was on his feet. He grabbed a flashlight and strode to the door, throwing it open. The beam caught Larissa full in the face, and she raised her hand instinctively, squinting against the light. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Archie lowered the flashlight, and his expression changed from alarm to something harder, colder, more disappointed than angry. "You followed me," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Larissa opened her mouth, but no words came. What could she possibly say? How could she explain that she'd suspected him of crimes? That she'd planned to use him as a sacrificial pawn in her corporate chess game? That she'd been so blinded by her own fear and ambition that she couldn't see basic human decency when it was right in front of her? "Why?" Archie asked. His voice still soft, but edged with steel. "Because I'm poor? Because I'm just a janitor? Or because you needed someone to blame? And I was convenient." The words hit Larissa like physical blows. She'd never been spoken to like this, with such unflinching honesty, such directness. People at Buxton kowtowed to her, flattered her, feared her. No one had ever looked at her the way Archie was looking at her now, with profound disappointment in what she represented, I thought. Larissa started, then stopped. Her voice sounded small, uncertain. Nothing like the commanding tone she used in boardrooms. "I thought you were stealing. Or sabotaging. The board wants. They need. They need a scapegoat." Archie finished for her. "And you thought I'd do just fine." He shook his head slowly. "Come inside. It's too cold to talk out here, and if you wake the children, you'll answer to them, not to me." Larissa followed him inside. Feeling like a prisoner being led to judgment, Archie closed the door carefully and gestured to a makeshift chair, a wooden crate with a cushion on top. Larissa sat, her eyes darting to the sleeping children, to the broken machines, to the evidence of poverty and love existing side by side. Archie remained standing, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Her name was Callista," he began, his voice distant, as if he were speaking from memory rather than to the woman in front of him. Callista Flynn. She was a foster mother. Took in kids nobody else wanted, the sick ones, the traumatized ones, the ones with behavioral problems. She loved them all like they were her own. He paused, swallowing hard. She died 3 years ago. Ovarian cancer. By the time they caught it, it was everywhere. Larissa sat motionless, barely breathing. Archie continued, his voice growing rougher with emotion. "I was a mechanical engineer, top of my field. But when she got sick, I quit. To take care of her. Spent every penny we had on treatments that didn't work. When she died, I had nothing left except a promise I made her. Take care of her kids. These 5. He gestured to the sleeping forms. Nobody wanted them. The system would have split them up. Put them in group homes. Maybe separated them forever. So I kept them. I rented this warehouse for $200 a month from a landlord who doesn't ask questions. I took the first job I could get that paid cash weekly, and every night, I fix things, computers, phones, radios, anything people throw away, and I sell them so these children can eat." He turned to face Larissa fully, and his eyes were blazing now, not with anger but with a kind of righteous intensity she'd never encountered. "You want to know what I think, Miss Constance? I think wealth and poverty don't measure a person's character. But the way you looked at me from day one, the way you've always looked at me, it was never one human being seeing another human being. It was someone at the top looking down at something beneath her, something she could use or discard as needed. And that's a poverty no amount of money can fix." Larissa felt something inside her chest crack open, some sealed chamber she'd kept locked for decades. She turned away, unable to meet his gaze, her vision blurring with tears she'd sworn never to shed again. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You're right. About all of it." She stood up, moving toward the door on unsteady legs. "I'm sorry I disturbed you. I'll leave you alone now." But even as she said it, she knew that leaving wouldn't erase what she'd seen, wouldn't heal what had been broken inside her, wouldn't let her return to the comfortable numbness of her corner office. Something fundamental had shifted. And there was no going back. The crisis came exactly 1 week later. Larissa was in an emergency board meeting when the building's climate control system crashed. Within minutes, the temperature on the upper floors began to plummet in January, with outdoor temperatures near zero. This wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Worse, the internal network went down simultaneously, cutting off all communication and data access. The board members sat bundled in their coats, their breath visible in the conference room, while Larissa frantically called the IT department. Oliver Dermott, the head of technical operations, arrived with his team 30 minutes later. He was a thin man with slicked-back hair and a permanent expression of condescension, wearing an expensive suit and a watch that cost more than Archie's annual salary. Larissa had never liked him, but he was supposed to be the best in the business. For 2 hours, Oliver and his team poked at circuits and typed at terminals, achieving exactly nothing. The cold deepened. Employees huddled in the lobby. The board members' patience evaporated. Franklin Buxton stood up, his face purple with rage. This is unacceptable, Larissa. If we can't maintain basic infrastructure, perhaps we need new leadership. Larissa felt the familiar panic, rising, the same panic that had led her to follow Archie, to look for scapegoats, to sacrifice others to save herself. But this time, something different happened. This time, she thought of a man kneeling among broken machines at 2 in the morning, fixing them with patience and skill for children who had no one else. This time, she made a different choice. "I know someone who can fix it," she said quietly. 20 minutes later, Archibald Flynn stood in the server room, still wearing his janitor's uniform, surveying the chaos with calm, analytical eyes. Oliver Dermott stood behind him, arms crossed, radiating skepticism and barely contained fury. "This is absurd," Oliver muttered to Larissa. "You're trusting a janitor with our entire system?" Larissa didn't answer. She watched as Archie pulled a small toolkit from his backpack, the same precise instruments she'd noticed weeks ago, and began working. His fingers moved with absolute confidence, tracing wires, testing connections, isolating problems. Within 5 minutes, he'd identified the issue. A cascading failure, triggered by a single corroded microchip in the climate control motherboard, which had sent a surge through the network infrastructure. Oliver's team had been looking at software when the problem was hardware. They'd been treating symptoms when Archie found the disease. It took him exactly 18 more minutes to repair the damage. The heat kicked on with a satisfying hum. The network lights began blinking green. Throughout the building, computers flickered back to life. Larissa stood in the doorway watching, her heart pounding not with panic now but with something else: admiration, gratitude, and a growing realization that she'd been wrong about everything that mattered. "Where did you learn to do this?" she asked softly. Archie didn't look up from his work. "MIT. Class of 2007. Mechanical engineering, with a focus on integrated systems. I designed climate control units for hospital operating rooms. It's how I met my wife. She was a nurse." He closed the panel carefully and turned to face Larissa. "But I'm sure Oliver's credentials are much more impressive." Oliver's face had gone white, then red, then a mottled purple. He'd spent 2 hours failing to fix what a janitor had repaired in 20 minutes. And worse, he'd done it in front of the CEO. But Oliver Dermott hadn't climbed to his position by accepting humiliation gracefully. In his mind, the gears were already turning, the trap already being set. If he couldn't compete with Archie's skills, he'd destroy Archie's reputation instead. 2 days later, Oliver struck. He called an emergency meeting with Larissa and the board, presenting evidence he claimed proved sabotage. "I've reviewed the security footage," he announced, pulling up edited video on the conference room screen. When he finally returned home after midnight, utterly exhausted, he collapsed into bed, too weary to even bother changing his clothes. The days began to blur into an indistinguishable cycle of relentless labor and fitful, inadequate sleep. Darius worked tirelessly, snatching a few hours of rest whenever he could. He continued his quiet inquiries, asking cautious questions to individuals who, fearing repercussions, were often unwilling to provide answers. Larissa felt her stomach twist as she watched the clips Archie entering secure areas, his hands moving near critical systems, the timestamps clearly visible. Franklin Buxton leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with vindication. "I told you, Larissa. You're too trusting. This man has been sabotaging our company, and you defended him." But something didn't sit right with Larissa. She'd spent years reading people, evaluating evidence, making decisions based on incomplete information, and her instincts, which she'd learned to trust again since that night at the warehouse, were screaming that something was wrong. "I'd like to review the full security footage," she said calmly. "Not just these clips. Everything from the past month." Oliver's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "That's unnecessary. I've compiled the relevant—" "I insist," Larissa interrupted. "In fact, I'll review it myself. Tonight." with our external security consultant." She turned to her assistant. "Please, call Reginald Hayes at Hayes Security Solutions and have him meet me here at 7. Oliver's composure cracked completely. "That's a waste of company resources. I've already done the analysis, and I'm going to verify it," Larissa said flatly. Meeting adjourned. That night, with Reginald Hayes sitting beside her, Larissa reviewed 12 hours of unedited security footage. What she found made her blood run cold. The clips Oliver had shown were real, but they'd been carefully selected and edited to remove context. The full footage told a completely different story. At 11:30, when Archie had entered the server room, it was immediately after an alarm had gone off. An alarm that had been triggered by Oliver himself, who'd entered the room 10 minutes earlier using his master access card and deliberately disconnected a cooling unit. At midnight, Archie had gone to the electrical closet because Oliver had left a panel unsecured, creating a safety hazard. At 1:15, Archie was responding to a generator warning light that Oliver had activated remotely. "This is textbook framing," Reginald said grimly. "Your head of technical operations has been creating problems and ensuring your janitor was caught responding to them. He's building a case to get Flynn fired and make himself look good in the process." But it went deeper than that. As they continued reviewing footage, they found something else. Oliver had been accessing confidential financial data and forwarding it to his personal email. He'd been stealing proprietary information, likely to sell to competitors or use in a future venture. The sabotage of Archie was just a cover. A way to create chaos and blame that would distract from his real crimes. Larissa felt ice-cold fury flooding through her. She called an emergency board meeting for 8 the following morning. She didn't tell Oliver what she'd found. She wanted to see his face when the truth came out. The conference room was packed when Larissa entered, carrying a laptop under her arm. Oliver sat near the front, wearing his expensive suit and that same condescending expression. Franklin Buxton drummed his fingers on the table impatiently. Larissa set up her laptop, connected it to the projection system, and turned to face them all. "Last meeting, Oliver Dermott presented evidence, suggesting Archibald Flynn has been sabotaging our systems. I've reviewed the complete security footage with an independent expert. Here's what actually happened." She played the unedited clips, narrating each one with cold precision. The room grew silent as board members watched Oliver systematically creating problems and framing Archie for them. Then she showed the evidence of data theft spreadsheets full of proprietary financial information, forwarded to Oliver's personal email at 2 in the morning, downloaded onto flash drives, prepared for sale. Oliver's face drained of all color. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "This is ridiculous. You're trusting edited footage. I'll sue for defamation. You'll be escorted from the building by security," Larissa said quietly. "Immediately. We're filing criminal charges for corporate espionage and fraud. Your credentials have been revoked. Clean out your desk under supervision. And pray your lawyer is better at his job than you were at yours." 2 security officers appeared at the doorway. Oliver looked around the room desperately, seeking allies, finding none. As he was led away, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor, Larissa felt no satisfaction, no triumph. She felt only a deep weariness and a determination to finally do something right. She found Archie at the warehouse that evening. He was teaching the youngest girl, 5-year-old Matilda, how to use a computer mouse, guiding her small hand with infinite patience. The other children were doing homework at a makeshift table constructed from salvaged wood. When Larissa knocked softly on the door, they all looked up with guarded expressions. They knew her now as the woman who'd spied on Uncle Archie, the woman who couldn't be trusted. Archie stood up and came to the door. "Miss Constance, I didn't expect to see you again." Larissa found herself unable to speak for a moment. All her prepared words disappeared. Finally, she managed. "May I come in? I need to say something. To you. And to them." Archie studied her face, then nodded and stepped aside. Larissa entered the warm space, feeling the children's eyes on her. She turned to face Archie directly. And then, in front of everyone, she did something she'd done perhaps twice in her entire adult life. She bowed her head. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I judged you before I knew you. I suspected you of crimes, because you were poor, because you were in a position I thought was beneath notice. I was ready to sacrifice you to save my own position. Everything you said about me was true. I looked down instead of across. I saw a job title instead of a human being. And I was wrong." Archie's expression softened slightly, but he didn't speak. Larissa continued, her voice thick with emotion she no longer tried to hide. "Oliver Dermott was fired today. He'd been framing you for sabotage while stealing company secrets. You were cleared of everything. The board wants to offer you a position in our engineering department, a real position, with real pay." She paused. "But I'm not here about that. I'm here because I want to help these children. If you'll let me." One of the older girls, Gwen, 12 years old, with sharp eyes that reminded Larissa uncomfortably of herself, spoke up. "Why should we trust you? You wanted to hurt Uncle Archie. You shouldn't trust me." Larissa replied honestly. "Not yet. I have to earn that. But I'm asking for a chance to try." She pulled an envelope from her coat. "This is a check from my personal account. Not company money, my money. It's enough to rent a real apartment for you all, to buy proper beds and supplies. And I've contacted a construction company. They're going to build a classroom here, in this warehouse, with heating and computers and everything you need to learn. It'll be called the Flynn and Friends Learning Center. It's not about publicity. It's not about tax write-offs. It's about doing what I should have done from the beginning. Seeing people, really seeing them, and helping where help is needed." Archie took the envelope with trembling hands. When he opened it and saw the amount, his eyes filled with tears. "Larissa, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet," Larissa replied softly. "Let me prove that I mean it. Let me earn the right to be part of this." She looked at the children, at their suspicious faces, and their protective postures around their Uncle Archie. "All of you." The construction took 6 weeks. Larissa visited the site every evening after work, watching as the warehouse was transformed. Proper walls went up, with insulation rated for winter temperatures. A heating system was installed, not salvaged equipment, but brand new units with warranties and maintenance contracts. The classroom took shape with rows of new desks, a whiteboard, bookshelves waiting to be filled. Archie supervised everything, his engineer's eye catching problems before they became issues, his knowledge of the children's needs shaping every decision. During those 6 weeks, something else was built: trust. Larissa started coming not just to supervise but to help. She painted walls alongside Archie. She assembled bookshelves with the older girls. She learned their names, their dreams, their fears. She learned that Gwen wanted to be a doctor, that Audrey loved mathematics, that Beatrix could draw beautifully, that the younger Larissa had a gift for languages, that Matilda believed in fairies and magic with absolute conviction. She learned that children could forgive more easily than adults, that poverty didn't diminish brilliance, that love multiplied when it was shared rather than hoarded. And Archie learned something too. He learned that not everyone who came from wealth was incapable of change, that judgment could transform into understanding, that the woman who'd followed him in suspicion could become someone who showed up every evening with dinner for everyone, who listened to children's stories with genuine interest, who slowly, gradually, became part of their strange, makeshift family. The dedication ceremony for the Flynn and Friends Learning Center happened on a Saturday morning in early March. The children had insisted on decorating everything themselves: hand-painted banners hung from the rafters, strings of paper flowers draped across doorways, drawings covered every available wall space. Larissa arrived early, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her corporate armor, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. The children were a chaos of excitement, running through the new space, claiming desks, marveling at the computers that actually worked, the books that were actually new, the heat that actually kept them warm. Archie stood in the center of it all, smiling more broadly than Larissa had ever seen, his eyes bright with tears he didn't bother to hide. Gwen approached Larissa shyly. "We made something for you," she said, holding out a hand-drawn card. Inside, in careful handwriting, it read, "Thank you for seeing us. Love." The Flynn family. All 5 children had signed it. Even little Matilda, whose signature was more of a scribble than letters. Larissa felt her throat tighten. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means more than you know." As the morning wore on, the children settled into their new classroom, exploring, playing, gradually growing hungry. Young Beatrix, 7 years old with curly dark hair, approached Larissa and tugged on her sleeve. "Miss Larissa, will you stay for dinner with us? Uncle Archie's making spaghetti." Larissa glanced at Archie, uncertain. He met her eyes and nodded slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're welcome to stay," he said. "If you want to." Larissa felt something warm bloom in her chest. Something she couldn't quite name but recognized as the opposite of the cold isolation she'd lived with for so long. "I'd like that," she replied softly. "Very much." As evening fell, they all gathered around the long table Archie had built from reclaimed wood. The children chattered about their day, about their new classroom, about the books they wanted to read. Archie served spaghetti on mismatched plates, and Larissa helped, comfortable now in this space that had once seemed so foreign. When they all sat down together, Matilda insisted on saying grace her own version, which involved thanking God for spaghetti, Uncle Archie, computers, Miss Larissa, and magic that makes broken things get fixed. After dinner, the children drifted toward their sleeping area, tired from the day's excitement. Archie and Larissa cleaned up together in comfortable silence. As Larissa dried the last plate, she spoke quietly. "I've been thinking about something Matilda said. About magic that fixes broken things." She paused. "I think I was broken, Archie. I think I've been broken for a very long time. So focused on surviving, on protecting myself, that I forgot how to actually live." Archie set down the dish he was washing and turned to face her. "We're all broken in some way," he said gently. "Life breaks everyone eventually. The question is what we do after, whether we stay broken or whether we let ourselves be fixed." "And what fixes us?" Larissa asked. Archie smiled. "Other people. Connection. Love. The same things that break us can heal us, if we're brave enough to let them." They stood there in the soft light of the warehouse turned home. 2 people who'd started as CEO and janitor, as judgment and judged, and had somehow become something else entirely. Friends, partners in this strange venture of raising 5 children who needed them. Maybe, eventually, something more. But that was a question for another day. Outside, the first warm breeze of spring stirred the air. Inside, children slept peacefully in real beds with real blankets, dreaming of futures that suddenly seemed possible. And 2 adults who'd learned to see past titles and assumptions, past wealth and poverty, past fear and isolation, stood together in the warm light, beginning something new, not a fairy tale ending, not a perfect resolution. Just 2 broken people, choosing to be fixed together, one day at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one genuine human connection at a time. The light caught Larissa's blonde hair as she turned to check on the children one last time. Archie noticed how different she looked from that first night, softer, warmer, more real. And Larissa, glancing at Archie's tired but content face, saw not a janitor or an engineer or any job title at all. She saw the man who'd shown her what it meant to be truly human. "Same time next Saturday?" she asked softly. "Same time," Archie confirmed. "The kids would be disappointed if you didn't show up." "Just the kids?" Larissa asked, surprising herself with the gentle teasing in her voice. Archie's smile widened. "No. not just the kids. And there, in the warmth of the Flynn and Friends Learning Center, at 8 o'clock on a Saturday evening in early March, something that had started at 2 in the morning finally came full circle. The truth that darkness had revealed was now growing in the light. And both of them, the CEO who'd learned to see, and the janitor who'd always known how, were grateful for the journey, for the brokenness that had led to healing, for the suspicion that had transformed into trust, and for the children who'd taught them both what really mattered in this brief, precious, complicated life.